Rabbi Horowitz. As I was noting earlier to the staff at the little get-together in the school, apart from the temperature, which is warm, it seems to be a warm community, and it's good. So the next time, Rabbi Horowitz, you gotta get us out here for Shabbos.
You need to say you should bring your wife also.
She's from B'nai B'rak, so she can handle the warmth. No question. I was given very strict marching orders by Rabbi Klein, Rabbi Horowitz about what we should, what we shouldn't do, and I'm going to try to stick to it as much as possible. But I can't promise that I will, because first of all, the crowd makes me feel, almost without exception, that whatever I'm going to say, I'm preaching to the choir. So, like, why did this guy come over from Brooklyn? We know everything he's going to say. But there may be a few things that you don't, and I may just be able to deepen, maybe I'm being a little presumptuous, deepen a little bit your appreciation of some of the nakuda, some of the issues at hand. The general topic is, of course, parenting and the challenges that are involved with parenting. I remember the day when parenting did not exist as a word. A parent was a noun, you were a parent. It was never a verb, you know. Now it's become a zach, you know, parenting. And maybe with good reason, because there's so many challenges, so many chidushim. A child will experience changes, or society changes, in the span of a year as much as it used to in 50 years' time back in the day. I don't know when the day is, but it's not in the last 20, 30, 40 years. But back maybe before the war, you know, society just didn't change that often. So parenting is not so simple. And it requires more than just a good feeling. Parenting is very crucial. The way our kids come out will depend largely on what we do, what mechanchim do, and what we do as parents. Baruch Hashem, I'm already into the great grandparenting phase of life, Baruch Hashem. And, right? So I don't have that nitty gritty on a daily basis, but we still get involved as much as possible. You know, if a guy came up to you and says, I don't know, my doctor said I needed brain surgery. And a friend of mine says he'd like to do the surgery. And I told him, I didn't know you were a doctor. So he said to me, I'm not. Did you go to medical school? I said, no, never set foot in any medical school. He says, why in the world did you think you can do brain surgery? So he told me, I think I have a good feeling for it. You know, I think I can do it well. Anybody who subjects himself to that kind of a surgeon, that kind of a surgery, really needs the brain surgery. I wouldn't say the parenting is as complicated as brain surgery. In many ways, it's more. Because it's ongoing. Surgery, you're in 4, 5, 6 hours in the OR, and that's it. Parenting, you're in the long haul. And there are many complications. So let's I jot down a few nakudas, a few points that I want to accentuate. Limits. It's not news that we've been taught. The Gemara tells us this. Right? The left hand, which is the weaker of the two, should be the one that disciplines. And the yamin, who is the stronger of the two hands, should be the one that brings close. Right? In other words, there are two things involved here. One is the balance between the weaker and the stronger arms. We know where we have to put the emphasis in the stronger one. But another point that emerges from this is that there has to be that balance. There has to be these limits. We have to honor the fact that there need to be limits in the lives of our children. Where there are no limits, it can be catastrophic. I'll give you some examples. Today, kids are the object of fear coming from parents. Many parents are afraid of their kids. They're afraid that if they discipline their children a little bit too much, the kids are going to be out of here. We're aware of the fact that Rashi tells us that there's no comparing one who serves God out of love and one who serves out of fear. So one who serves out of fear, when the pressure gets a little bit too much, they check out. That's what Rashi teaches us. Parents are afraid that their kids are going to check out. This famous educator by the name of Rabbi Kramer, some of you may have heard the name. Rabbi Kramer was once giving a lecture, and I heard him say, parents are very conscientious in the nutrition that they provide for their kids. Nothing like Pearl's Knishes, I gotta tell you, that ain't in existence anymore. But the nutrition we give to our kids, we give vitamin A and vitamin B and vitamin C. But the one that we don't give to our kids enough, said Rabbi Kramer, was vitamin N. So we looked at him. Hello? Vitamin N? He said, yeah. The word no. We have to discipline our kids and we have to provide limits for our kids. Limits are components for the way that they will grow. The Pasuk tells us, "V'hamayim lahem chayma me'minom u'mismailam." The Kriyas Yamsuf, the water, the Red Sea split, did it not? So the water was like a wall on their right and on their left. And many of the holy books tell us that means a chayma is the Torah or discipline. The way we raise our children has to be a little bit like a chayma. It has to be the toughness of a wall. Now we know that beneath the wall there was water, so there is that softness, there is that pliability, there is that love and that understanding and giving in when necessary. But when it's necessary, hamayim lehem chayma. The water has to be, the water was a wall, and our discipline of our children has to be like a wall. So that's point number one. I'm racing through all of these topics that deserve each in its own right a lot more time, but I'm trying to cover a lot of ground here. The second thing is the overindulgence, which is connected, of course, to the first one, and that is giving them a little bit too much. Let me share with you an idea. The idea comes to us in the Gemara. The Gemara tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu was defending the Jewish people after the sin of the golden calf, the Chet Egel. Moshe Rabbeinu told God, "What do you want from them? It was you that gave them all that gold." As the Pasuk says in the Navi Hosea, the Kesef Osul Hem V'Zov Osul Abba. The Kesef here Beisi Lahem V'Zov. Where Hashem says, I gave them a lot of silver, a lot of gold, and they went and they consecrated it to Baal, which is idol worship, which is a reference to the golden calf. And Moshe, our leader, our defender, our advocate, said to God, but it's not their fault. You gave them the gold. What do you expect them to do? And the Gemara compares it to a situation where a father, a king, who has a son, and he wants to bring the son out into society. He should make his mark, and he should go out into the world. So what he does is he bathes him, gives him new shoes, fine clothing, and he puts a satchel of gold around his neck, and he escorts him out of the palace, and he puts him right in front of a house of ill repute. And the Gemara says, what could that son possibly do to avoid sinning? If we're giving everything under the sun, and then some, to our children, because we want to curry favor with them, and we're afraid that they're going to feel deprived, then we are setting them up for failure. Our intention may be good. We want to be good parents. Good parents? Maybe I should mention this later on, but I remember twice hearing the same statement from Rabbi Avraham Chaim Levin, who passed away a couple of years ago, one of the great Torah giants of America, who lived in Chicago. And he said, concerning the issue of smartphones for kids, he says, parents want to be good parents, so they buy their kids smartphones. You want to be a good parent? Buy your child a loaded pistol and give it to him. That'll be really being a good parent. He used that metaphor twice. So giving and giving more is not something which is conducive. The whole lack of discipline, the overindulgence, giving them too much, we are not doing our children favors by acting in this way. One of the foremost child psychologists in the northeast of the United States, that's the part north of Florida. His name is Dr. David Pelkowitz. Some of you may have heard the name. He gave a presentation for an event that I set up on parenting, and he told a story which happened with him as a doctor. And parents came in with a very unruly son. He was, I don't know whether he had ODD, obedience deficiency disorder, or whatever. But he was a terror, right? He wouldn't listen to his parents. As Dr. Pelkowitz got to know the history of this family, the history of the way the parents are raising the kids, he figured that maybe weakness on the part of the parents, but in front of the parents, he told the kid, I'm going to recommend to your parents that if you don't comply with every single order that they give you, they ground you. Not be able to use a telephone, can't go out of the house, blah, blah, blah. Grounded. So the kid flew into a fit of proverbial rage. And as this is happening, Dr. Pelkowitz told the parents, do you mind stepping out for a few minutes? I want to speak privately with your son. And as he was getting to know the son a little bit more, and he was talking about this advice that he was giving his parents, the boy said to Dr. Pelkowitz, Doctor, it's about time. Children really crave that heavy discipline. They crave that hamayim lehem chaymam eminam b'smaylam. It's our error, largely as a result of maybe the Mattel toy company and others, where we get this imagery of wanting or seeming to want to give more and more to the kids, just give them all that they want. And we have this cockamamie notion that that's going to make them into better people. It does not. The overindulgence, the lack of discipline, it's not what children really crave. Deep down inside, they won't admit it because they want what they want. I want that doll, I want that this, I want that. But deep down inside, should I call it subconsciously? That's an overused word, but it might be that. They really crave to have that yad takifa, that toughness of discipline and training in their lives. They know that it's good for them. Another issue, and I hope and trust that I'm not stepping on anyone's toes with this, certainly it's not the intention, but matrimonial harmony among parents is a key issue in parenting. It's not only an issue that affects the husband and the wife, but it's an issue that affects children, or it certainly can affect children. And I will just tell you a small story, how this became manifest. And I was told this story by the mashgiach of a yeshiva in Manchester. I happened to be in Manchester teaching. This goes back 7-8 years ago. And I stayed in the home of somebody by the name of Rabbi Kupitz, whose grandfather was Rabbi Yehuda Zev, the Rosh Yeshiva, Segal, the Rosh Yeshiva of Manchester. So he was a mashpia in one of the yeshivas in Manchester, and he told me the following story of a Talmud, let's call him Yankel for a moment, where Yankel was really a very, very good boy. He was learning, davening, erlich, all of the good qualities and virtues that we expect to have to see in our Talmidim. Yankel represented them all until things started to take a turn for the basement. Things started to change. Wasn't coming on time to the yeshiva. Lateness became habitual. Wasn't learning. Just fall asleep during class, like he didn't care. So they figured they'll let him go for a ride a little bit and see, if it goes away, because that's not really Yankel. But it didn't go away. So this Rabbi Kupitz called him in and said, Yankel, what's the story with you? So the boy started crying. He was a 10th grader. Started crying and said, Rabbi, for the last few months, every night I go to sleep. I try to go to sleep. And what I have to do is bury my head under the pillow in order to drown out the shouts between my parents coming from their room. And just reach the point where I'm not able to function anymore. The follow-up to that is, first of all, not known to me. Secondly, irrelevant. What's relevant is the symptom. What's relevant is that the lack of matrimonial harmony can do terrible things to the child. Another thing it does for the child is it breeds an inability for that child to trust the system. Because both the school and his parents represent the so-called system. But when he sees that he can't really trust both his parents, the next step is to mistrust one, and the next step might be to mistrust both. And if you mistrust those great representatives of the adult world, you end up mistrusting other people, including your Rabbi, your Mora, your principal. you're Rav. And you lose respect as a child for the authority figures in your life. All because of the fact that there was not matrimonial bliss between the parents. Now trust me, I know what this is about. You can't always agree with your wife. You can't always agree with your husband. That's fine, you don't have to agree. But there has to be an atmosphere within the home where even a disagreement is laced with respect, with derech eretz. That's another challenge in parenting, which is unfortunately pretty common. You know what parents want from a school? They want their kids to go to school and come home with a capital H. Happy. Happy. It's all about being happy. What does he know? Doesn't have to know, doesn't have to be that learned, as long as he's happy. Happiness became the buzzword in education. You know, it is okay for a child to fail in something. In fact, some people crave failures midei pam, from time to time, because that is a step for growth. There is a verse in Tanakh that says, I'll translate it, but the pasuk says, Sheva yipol tzadik vekom, which means, literally translated, 7 times the righteous person will fall and he will rise again. So the world, whoever that is, translates this or explains this as it refers to the idea that even if somebody falls 7 times, that's not a problem. He can always, resuscitate. He can always get back to his strength and reinvigorate himself. Become. There was a famous Rosh Yeshiva in New York, Rabbi Yitzchak Hutner Zatzal, who said that the explanation is different. It's not even if you fall 7 times, you can still rise. But it's specifically because of the fact that you have fallen 7 times that you rise. Because the failures that people have are the stepping stones for growth. If we take away those stepping stones for growth from our children, we are stunting their growth. There are those in the medical field that say that doing all of these immunizations, I'm not talking about the vaccine for COVID. That's a different parsha, which, I have my mask here by the way, but none of you, except only one person is wearing it, so I'm going to join the majority. Otherwise I would join you, but I'm not talking about those vaccinations. I'm talking about the immunities, this shot and that. And we all believe that they're important. I've, of course, had all of my kids have all of these shots, but there are those in the medical field that feel that you're weakening the child's immune system. You're weakening his ability to fight off disease later in life because you're just setting him up so that his body is happy. And that's all that's important. Give the kid a chance to fight things off. Now, I'm not saying that in the medical field that I espouse this. As I said earlier, we all believe that the immunization shots are very important. But when it comes to the chinuch of our children, an occasional failure is fine. You know, there's a country called Finland, right? In Finland, they have, like we have here in the United States and Canada, we have dates which are important in our calendar, even more important than Mother's Day. Labor Day, and we have in Canada Victoria Day, and here we have Veterans, all sorts of commemorations. There's a day in Finland on their official calendar called Failure, I think that's the name, Failure Day, where everyone in the country is encouraged to celebrate some failing of their personality or some failure that they've had in their endeavors during the past year. Because to celebrate failures is to set yourself up for further growth. And parents do not realize this. What? Happy is not a goal in life. It's good to be happy. It's good to be happy. Of course, we have to understand what happiness really is. And there's the Orchos Tzadikim, which I'm not going to get into now. It's way too complicated for now. But happiness is a wonderful thing. But first and foremost, it has to be happiness which is associated with self-fulfillment and with achieving that which you are set up to which you're set to achieve. That's really what happiness is. That's when the soul, the innermost person, becomes happy. So that's something that we have to foster as parents. Again, each of these topics is a nosei b'fnei atzmo. You probably speak Ivrit, yeah? Okay, and maybe some of you do. My wife's Israeli, so I speak Ivrit now.
Good for you.
Yeah, it is. It is. Good for my kids too. Three languages. But I want to talk about the theme which I've been asked should become, to some extent, the focus of the evening, and that is technology. And I'm supposed to leave a half hour for questions. Now, between me, you, and the lamppost, I don't think there's a half hour's worth of questions coming from the crowd sitting here today, right? So I'm going to leave time for questions, but I'm going to take some of that half hour for myself and use it to present to you on technology. Statistics, I'll give you some statistics and I'll give you some facts and figures, which I'm going to have to consult my notes for because I don't remember all the numbers. As I told Mr. Rodney before, math was never my forte, you know. But before we get into statistics about technology, I got to tell you, in the spirit of what Rabbi Chaim Levin said that I mentioned earlier, you know, about buying your child, you want to be a good parent, buy your child a loaded pistol. Technology is a little bit of a confusing item because on the one hand, it opens vistas of knowledge. Computer, a smartphone, it's called a smartphone maybe because it is smart. Well, we don't really ascribe that adjective to a piece of machinery, but maybe it helps us to be smart. And computers is great. I mean, I do a lot of writing, and in my field in education terms, I basically rely on the computer for so much. So I can't sit here and knock against computers or say down with computers. That would be silly. Besides the fact that they're here to stay. But you need to understand the terrible, terrible challenges that are associated with computers, not for you, but for our children. There are challenges that are associated with technology, which should make you wonder whether or not you want your children to be exposed to technology at all. And I know that maybe is a far cry, not because this is Jacksonville. It's a far cry in Brooklyn. It's a far cry in Lakewood. To say seriously that we have to divest ourselves and our lives from any form of technology is a little bit ridiculous. In fact, there are all sorts of, I wouldn't say the word ruse because that's a negative concept, but there are real bona fide excuses for being able to have technology. But let's consider what the instruments of technology do to our children and the devastation that comes from them. First of all, it's an attack on it dulls the mind, let's put it that way. It crushes the ability to think critically. Critical thinking, critical analysis is one of the pillars of a person's intellectual maturation. We have to be able to think through. I mean, we as a nation have been doing it for many centuries. When you learn through a topic in the Gemara, a sugya, then you're putting your critical analysis and your faculties that are related to that into high speed, and we're accustomed to doing that. But the more that we rely on technology, the less we rely on those abilities. So in the Beis Medrash and the Gemara, maybe the effect is not as seen so much. But certainly in the other aspects of the child's intellectual development, his understanding of literature, math, history, science, etc., there's a dulling of the mind. People don't think anymore. A statistic, which I don't have a number for, is that kids are less prone to read today because the information is a lot too easy to procure. So if a person wanted once upon a time to find out the background of something, they would have to read a book. Heaven forbid today for people to read a book. They consult the Google Hador, and they just punch in those few words, those couple of letters or words that are the keywords in the search window, and he gets the information right away. So because of that instant technological gratification for our intellectual thirst, such as that may be, our minds are getting dulled and our children's minds are getting dulled. Well, when are they supposed to grow intellectually? If we're going to boggle their minds with a computer. Well, when are they supposed to grow intellectually if we're going to boggle their minds with a computer? If we're going to boggle their minds with a computer. Attention span was related to that. With the various forms of technology available, children are often more distracted and less likely to focus. Social isolation. Now we're getting a different kind of danger, more the psychological and worse. Privacy and safety. As advances in technology lead to increasing levels of connectedness, we must consider the effects that social media and the internet can have on our child's mental outlook. Now, a few years ago, I wrote an article for the OU magazine. I know I don't look like an OU person, and in fact, I'm not really, but they approached me as an educator for Torah Masorah to put in my 2 cents, probably valued in the end about 1.5 cents, but to put in my 2 cents into the issue of technology, social media, right? So I wrote an article, so some of what I'm going to share with you later on is direct quotes of myself. But those are facts and figures, which I got, guess how? Through Google, right? The privacy and safety of children is at stake. What about the wastage of time? What about the addiction factor? Wastage of time, and I'm getting some statistics to reflect on the wastage of time. Addiction, by the way, is never ever a good thing. And we know there are all sorts of addictions. One category of addiction is usually a physical or physiological addiction, such as to nicotine and to caffeine.
Chocolate.
Well, that has caffeine, chocolate, right? By the way, there's something in marijuana. Marijuana is becoming one of the huge challenges to parenting in the world. And I can give you whole sessions. I'm immersed currently, in rallying together the principles of Mesiftas in Brooklyn to deal collectively as a unit with the marijuana problem. The problem being totally exacerbated by the fact that it's become legal, or it's becoming legal, right? And by the fact that you don't have to smoke it. You can eat a brownie or a gummy bear and get your fix. There is a chemical, I think it's called DHS, which blurs your memory permanently if used often enough. Those are also dangerous. Those are physical addictions. I include marijuana in the physical addictions.
So is it also?
According to the Rosh Yeshivas, 1,000%. The problem is that as parents use it, thinking that it's not also,
What is it?
asur is forbidden, asur. So it becomes very difficult for parents to tell their children, you can't do that. Lama Abatao said, you're doing it, why is it forbidden for me? And of course there's no real answer to that question. So it's a problem. It's a part of what we have to do with our Masorah, with these Mesifta, Manalim, etc. Our first task force meeting is this coming a week from tomorrow, as a matter of fact, is to deal with the parenting component. Make sure that parents understand that they can't do it either. But today it's part of social life. And it's in the yeshivas, it's in Lakewood, it's in all over the place. I'm getting too tired about marijuana. But that's one kind of addiction. The other kind of addiction is mental addiction, right? Such as, there are no children here, sexual addiction is a mental addiction. It's not a physical one, it's a mental one. It's a taiva. And a taiva, in the world of taivas, a taiva is a ta'ava, it's a desire that you get more entrenched into. It just gets worse and worse, but it's not a physical addiction, it's a mental one. Addiction to technology is that kind of an addiction as well. It's a mental technology, people can't live with it. It's terrible. It gets to the point where, I did it sometimes, I'm stuck by a traffic light, sometimes in Borough Park, sometimes, every 2 minutes. And, I just have this little game I play with myself. I'm bored. I play with it again, let's see how many people walking by in front of the car have a little device, and they're either listening or looking or doing this or doing that, or most. Rahman al-Islam, which is Persian for holy mackerel, what are we doing to ourselves as a society? Recent statistics indicate that over 25%, this was in 2010, that's the source of information. By now it's worse, but let's go 2010, sure. Recent statistics indicate that over 25% of North American adolescents enter their social media sites at least 10 times daily. adolescents, kids, teenagers, with fully 20% of internet use consisting of connection with so-called Facebook friends. We're going to talk about Facebook friends separately. Can you imagine this? That was 12 years ago, 11 years ago? I'm sure it's more than 25% of North American adolescents, or 20% of internet use connecting with so-called Facebook friends. Now, there are those who would say, that's the non-Jewish world. You're kidding me, right? It maybe it's less. We have to label a little bit with optimism, a little bit of belief in the virtues of the Jewish people. So maybe it's a little bit less. But it's a raging problem in our midst as well. We need to recognize that. You know what's most interesting? Rabbi Shochet can probably testify if he knows this aspect of life in Silicon Valley. Apparently, the greatest executives from companies such as Microsoft, Apple, including Bill Gates, who's no longer there with them, and including Steve Jobs, who's no longer in this world altogether, they did not allow, or they severely restricted their own children from having access to technology. They're pushing this poison on the rest of the world. Over the eigene Kinderlach, but for their own children, they're a lot more careful. 2007, Gates announced a family policy not to allow kids to have their own phones until they're 14. Today, the average American child gets his first or her first phone around the age of 10. And if you're saying to yourself, not my kids, I would say, Baruch Hashem. But this is society crowding in around us. Yeah. We do absorb that. In Yiddish, there's an expression, "Azoi v'se krisseltzach, azoi hideltzach." In the same way that the Christian world has its, let's say, system of values that encroaches on our world as well. Christian world, or maybe the Muslim world, has an effect on the way we think and what we do as well. So Silicon Valley, so Steve Jobs, in an interview said that he prohibited his kids from using the newly released iPad, which he himself produced. But not his kids. You want to poison your kids? Good, that'll make me money. Which it did, but not my kid, because I know the danger. And what about the access to inappropriate material? And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Talk about technology and the trouble it gets you in. And danger, I mentioned danger only peripherally a moment ago. We all know, maybe from having heard stories, maybe from having seen clips or films or whatever it is, predators, sexual predators, abusive individuals who are waiting, lurking in the shadows, waiting to prey upon someone innocent, like your child. Do we have a guarantee? If they have access to internet, if they have access to technology, we don't have a guarantee. The presumptuous amongst us will say that I am a good mechanech of my child, and I can trust him because I know what I've put into him. We hope that to some extent that sentiment is true, but it's only to maybe a large extent. Nothing is foolproof. You want some statistics? Here's some statistics. 93% of teens aged 12 to 17 go online regularly. 93%. 69% of teens have their own computer. They don't have that loaded pistol, but they do have a computer. 63% of teen internet users go online every day. Boy, that's a lot of homework. Or is it? 27% of teens use their phones to get online for easier access through the phone. They don't need the computer. They have an iPhone, a smartphone. 73% of teens are on social network. And the average teen has 201 Facebook friends. Let's say Facebook didn't exist. I don't have 201 friends. Maybe the 201 people who think they're my friends think that they're my friends, but I don't have 201 friends. Facebook friends? In your teenage years? Do you really believe that? But they're called friends. That's another secret, cutesy way of convincing people that everyone out there is a friend. You can trust a friend, can't you? You can give them your address, your age, and worse, as we're going to see, 55% of teens have given out personal info to someone they don't even know. 55%, which is today higher than 55%, including photos and physical descriptions. 29%, 30 by now more, of teens have posted mean information about others, or embarrassing photos about others, or spread rumors about someone. That's a whole genre called cyberbullying, which is all parsha b'fnei atzma. 29% have been stalked or contacted by a stranger or someone they don't know. Is that scary or what? You ready for this one? No kids in the room, right? 15% of the young people surveyed say they have sent nude photos of themselves or videos of themselves, also in that same state of undress. Something bothers me even more. 21% say they've received nude photos or videos from others. Notice the discrepancy between the 15% who sent out and 21% who received. That means some of those 15% are sending to more than one person. That's what Mr. Rodney's not here to correct me on this, but we know that the way the numbers add up, many people are sending to more than one party a photo of themselves unclothed. What for? I mean, what's the purpose? Let's say there was a way of koshering the purpose of sending such a photo to one person. There is none. But let's just say, what about the other people who you're sending it to? Oh, it can go on and on. No, it can't. Should I take questions or should I just continue with my presentation? Let me get to, I'll skip some of the statistics. Let me just get to the crunch. And the crunch is a little bit of a practicum. No, it's not that hard for anyone to compile statistics. Not that hard for people to compile statements made by Gedolei Israel, Gedolei Torah, and to present them, and to present a really damning case against technology. The reason I know that it's not that hard is because I did it. But when the oilam goes away from here, there has to be some element of going away with a takeaway. Okay, what do we do? How do we deal with this problem? So obviously, one of the suggestions of a practicum, but I know it's not realistic, I said earlier it's not really realistic, is complete avoidance. Most of us have to have some sort of computer in our lives. Many schools assign homework assignments which require the use of computers. So it's not realistic to say complete avoidance. There are places in the world where that is done. I live about 10 miles from one of those locations. This is Williamsburg. There are other places as well where it's almost completely avoided. I have relatives in Israel who do not have computer. Are they missing or lacking something in life? No, not at all. But whatever, it's not something that for most people here. Even if you do avoid, whether a cell phone might be an exception to that. Kids need the cell phone to stay on the safe side, they're in a jam, they're in trouble, whatever, to call home. All right. The next thing, obvious, and again, you've heard this a dozen times, at least, and that is the idea of having a filter on your device. A good filter. I don't mean K9, which is not bad, but it doesn't do the trick. Now, you don't have the luxury in Jacksonville of having tag, which they have in Lakewood and Muncie and in Brooklyn.
I spoke to Rabbi.
And he's willing to come down?
He's coming down.
That is another great accomplishment by Rabbi Horowitz.
We're looking for a sponsor.
That will not be another great accomplishment by Rabbi Klein.
No, it's somebody else. That's right.
Ashrecha v'toivlach, that's a wonderful thing. But it has to be a good, strong filter. There's a white list, a black list. There's different ways of doing it. But that's at the very, very minimum. That's what we absolutely have to have. Frankly, I don't think that a teenager should have a smartphone. You want to stay out of trouble, and in case something comes up, you have to have a cell phone. Maybe fine. There are many schools that require even that cell phone to be deposited in the front office when the kids set foot in the school in the morning. They can pick it up on the way out. But during the course of the day, they are not allowed to touch their cell phones. And that's a cell phone, but a smartphone, or a superphone, really, if you think about it, that is completely verboten. It should be. What are we doing to our children by allowing them that stuff? Another thing is, even in the best of situations, when we're talking about the dulling down of the mind, we're talking about the weighing down on their ability to critically analyze things, and the time wastage. We saw some of the statistics, how many hours, a couple of hours a day on the average adolescent's routine is spent on social media. So at the very least also, time caps. You have to have a time restriction. If your child will have your adolescent child, well, child, for heaven's sake, if your adolescent has access to technology, there has to be a time limitation to that. Yankala, if you need to, for whatever reason, and I'm going to be in the room right there with you, I'm allowing you 15 minutes each day, or whatever the time. It has to be a serious time cap, but also not so restrictive necessarily that it's going to make him stifle, depending on the culture of the place. But a time cap is very, very important. And there's one other which is really not only touching on technology, it touches on the core issue of parenting again, and that is the idea of time spent with children. You know, the history of chinuch goes back to a Gemara, in Bava Basra. There was a chap by the name of Yeshua ben Gamliel, who was a Klein Gadol. He was a high priest in the days of Yanai HaMelech, and he saw that those who have no fathers are not learning. So he decided there should be schooling, compulsory schooling. That goes back about 21 centuries. Here in the United States and in Canada, only started in the 1830s, 1840s, so about 170 years. 21 centuries he already started with us, because there were people who didn't have. So the question is, why weren't there that many people? There were that many Yisomim, there were that many orphans who didn't have fathers to learn with them. It wasn't a time of war, it wasn't a time of a pandemic or anything like that. It was, I think, prophetic on the part of Yeshua ben Gamliel to see there would be coming a time in our history where fathers and mothers might not be as available as they ought to be for the parenting of their children, teaching their children. So some of that parenting is being taken over by the schools, by the Beis Rabbi, by the educators. Rav Hutner said, he was once at a meeting, and somebody said, you people have so much to be proud about. He must have been a non-Jew, have public schooling for about 150 years back then, that was the time. You have it for so many centuries. So Rav Hutner later commented, anyone who says that doesn't get it, doesn't understand what chinuch is all about. Chinuch belongs with parents. It's because there's weakness in parenting that Yeshua ben Gamliel said, okay, we have to substitute that. Otherwise kids are going to be running around aimlessly. But the origin of that whole concept is the weakness in parenting. It's not something that we need to be proud about. But that's the point, weakness in parenting. We know that that's a situation. We know that that is a malady in our society. And that being the case, we know that the achrayus, the responsibility lies square on our shoulders. Some shoulders are bigger than others, mind you. But it lies upon our shoulders to deal with this responsibility. By spending time with kids. And to say that I'm pontificating, I want to share with you an experience that I had some years ago. It was probably 20-something years ago. I used to be in some hole that I still am somewhat of an alcoholic. I was a Rabbi and I was a principal, and I used to have Sidorim during the day, and I used to run an Agudas Yisrael newspaper. Do you remember Perspectives? Was that the time in Toronto you were there? Right. Fish remembers it for sure. When did I do perspectives, you think? It's not like he didn't have two full-time jobs. It was late at night. So as soon as I came home or whatever I was doing, I ran downstairs to my office and I was busy till 1 o'clock in the morning. And I started learning at 5:45 with Sammy Gellis, if you remember him. Right? My chavrusa for 32 years. Al Kapanim, one evening, my son Rabbi, who's today Baruch Hashem, he's a Rabbi in Manhattan. He's an English principal in Williamsburg and Satmar. And I was heading down from my office after the dinner, and he comes to me and he says, Abba. I'm an Abba, not a Tati. Abba. He asked me in Yiddish, is Tuten Tzatze Chazam mit mir hand? Are you going to have time to do the review work that I have to do for my cheder in Bobiv? Are you going to have time to learn with me today? When he wasn't looking, I did cry a little bit, not too long, I'm a big guy, like I would cry for long, but it hurt me so much that I was guilty of being that parent who didn't have enough time for his kids, and whose son had to ask him, will you have enough time to chazer with me? Well, of course I have to have that time. So I told him, yes I will, and we chazer. And I tried to change my routine a little bit. We're all guilty of that. We are, to one extent or another, workaholics. We need to be, and life is not cheap. Sometimes you have to hold on 2 or sometimes 3 jobs. Being a Rebbe, we have to do all sorts of things to make sure that we're ending the month, right? We may not have enough time for our kids, but whatever you do, this is what you gotta do. Squeeze every little hour or half hour or 15 minutes out of your schedule to devote it with your kids. I heard of Rabbi Krauss from Los Angeles, from Torres Emes, once told me a Maisa where he used to stand outside of school when the parents would come in with carpools and bring their kids to school in the morning. And one mother was walking her child to school, walking her child with one hand holding the child, the other one, she was handicapped, she only had the use of one hand at that time, but she was busy with the smartphone. So I said to her, wouldn't you rather use that time in the morning to say, what did you learn yesterday? What are you going to be learning today? Have a nice day, Shefela, be good, be proud of you. All sorts of little gushy things which mommies can say to kids and tatis can also say to kids. Wouldn't you rather spend the time on that? She was embarrassed and whatever. I don't know, again, how that story ended is not important. But that's just it's so typical, it's emblematic of the way we live our lives. You gotta give the time to your kids. We make investments in all sorts of things and we hope for a good, honorable return on that investment. The most important thing that you have, the best commodity you have is your children. You're not going to invest in them other than paying the tuition for the Jackson Hebrew Day School, Jacksonville. But investing them in your personal life. Real chesed is not what you give, but it's rather what you do with your body. That's the difference between chesed and tzedakah. That's what we got to do as parents. And as grandparents. Great-grandparents are already out of the future. I don't have to worry about that too much. Right? You're also a great-grandparent, sure. No? Rabbi?
Yeah.
Not yet? Soon. You have one in Providence or Boston? You have a son there, huh?
Son Providence.
Providence. Yitzhak? Al Kabbalah, and it being a little, just a drop of facetious, but the point should really not be underemphasized. The time that we spend with our kids is precious time. It's the best investment, and it's the most important component to securing less of a need and dependency on technology. Because you're involved with them, they don't have to hide in front of some screen and cower in a corner in order to get some gratification, because you're there for them. So that's a battle against technology. It's an investment and a cornerstone of good parenting, and that will be the makor, that will be the source of blessing and nachas that we'll have from our children. Now, we have some time for questions. The question is whether we have questions, and before I said that, Rabbi Horowitz raised his hand.
What do you do when all your kids' friends have something that they want that you don't want to give them, you feel they don't need, and they say, well, my friends have it, or my classmates do it. So how do you give the no, and how do you implement what you feel?
Two things. Number one is you do a very good selling job, but it has to be sincere about the values and the standards of your family. And you convince your child that this is something that others can only dream of but don't have, therefore they rely on the technology. We have a better standard. Another thing you can do to augment that is spend the same amount of money as the other person did spending for the smartphone for the child, buying something else. Buying Sforim, buying a kosher game, buying a swing set, I don't know, I'm not that imaginative. But don't let them have the impression that you are Tati Cheapo, but rather Tati was concerned. To show them not cheap, I'm going to buy something else.
But my friends all communicate via WhatsApp.
And you'll communicate with them not through WhatsApp, you'll communicate with them at school, and that's all that's necessary. When I grew up, you tell them, that's the way people communicated. It's so deeper. That's deeper in the communication.
בעברית, it's better.
אפשר בעברית?
כן, מאוד אפשר.
אז אצלי למשל הבנות שלי הן מתקשרות עם הסבא והסבתא בישראל עם הוואטסאפ. אז זה דרך של קומיוניקיישן איתם.
אם זה כל מה שהן עושות, אז אין לך בעיה בכלל.
אז זהו, שאתחיל לשלם והשם ישמור, אבל לא. ברוך השם.
השם ישמור אם את שומרת.
אני אגיד לך מה, זה משהו שאני דואגת להחזיק את הילדים יותר מדי בתוך בבל, בתוך כמו אורסטריט, זה גם לא טוב.
למה?
כי בסופו של דבר, they're going to go to the real world.
No, so you're right. מדי הרבה,
זה גם לא
לסגור
טוב.
אותם, גם לא טוב.
זה גם לא טוב, כי אחר כך אתה רוצה שהם יתקדמו בחיים וילכו יעשו מקצוע.
צודקת 100%.
אז איך הם צריכים לדעת שיהיה להם את הכלים, איפה הגבול, איפה הבורדר, מה כן מותר, מה לא מותר.
הגבול של הילדים שלך יהיה בדיוק איפה שאת שמה אותם. את צריכה לחשוב.
ואני לא יודעת גם מה טוב ומה לא טוב.
אז יש
כי אני לא
רבנים.
דוגמה, אני תמיד רוצה לעשות את הילדים שלי.
יש מחנכים, יש רבנים, תשאלי אותם מה לעשות בדיוק, אם את בספק. אבל עכשיו, בסדר. הגישה הזאת זה בסדר, היא מסוכנת מאוד. אז יש לי לשאול, תתייעצי איתם, תלכי לפי, אבל את צריכה לשים את הגבולות. לא להסתמך על זה שהם יעשימו, הם לא יעשימו.
לא, זה בטוח.
זהו.
I think part of the problem is, like you said about the marijuana, that the parents do it themselves.
Right.
But it's okay for us, just not for them.
The facetiousness in your question is exactly the point.
No,
Or in the Gemara Lashon, who moisiv lo, who mefarik. Exactly the question you're asking is the teretz to your question. I didn't mean that you were facetious, chas v'shalom. But the idea that it's okay for the parents, why isn't it good for the kids? It's not okay for the parents, and that is sure not okay for the kids. You tell the child what to do, but you act differently. It's, they're going to do what you do, not what you say. It's like the old story of a father takes his child aside and he says, Yankele, I want you to grow up and go to the world and become a great success. So Yankele accepts you and says, no, Tati, I want to be just like you. Because that's what the kids aspire to be like their parents. If the father is a failure in whatever it is, in his Yiddishkeit, then the kids are going to be failures.
But my kids see me in front of my computer 10 hours a day working, so that's what you do.
Do they know that you're working?
Yeah.
And that you've answered your question. I also spend hours a day in front of a computer. Writing, answering emails, having to do with the publications in terms of blah, 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 a whole bunch of things. I even have two computers, one at home and one in the office.
So someone once told me that they want to teach their kids how to drink whiskey. They show them the best whiskey and how to appreciate it, how to enjoy it. Otherwise, they're going to become alcoholics, and they'll just think alcohol. So like the same thing with computers. You teach them what you can do with it, what you can create with it. You can create a website. You can.
Did you, pardon me for interrupting you in the middle, did you ever hear of somebody who was an alcoholic but only for the best whiskey?
No, I'm saying the opposite. Because they know how to appreciate, a fancy single malt whiskey, so they're not going to just drink like crazy. So they understand, they're good.
Yeah, and through their addiction to the good alcohol, they'll fall into an addiction to all alcohol. There's no such thing as being addicted only to the good stuff.
No, I'm saying that's why you avoid the addiction, because you know how to appreciate it. You sip it, you enjoy it, you drink one thing, you do it because you know it's like.
Listen, when it comes
That
to
was
alcohol,
an analogy that took us off.
as far as I'm concerned, any drinking which is not on Shabbos, and even there has to be really
Forget the
moderate.
analogy, sorry.
Okay,
The
okay. Forget the analogy.
The question was technology.
Right.
You show your kids, like, this is what you create on the internet. You could make videos, you could send your Torah, you could
I have children who don't have technology in the house. They know that I have, and they know that I work with it. As a matter of fact, I got a heter from one of the most scrupulous, scrutinizing one of those scrutinizing boards of the Board of Ger in Yerushalayim, giving me a heter before my son got into yeshivas fasemas, that what I'm using it for and what the parameters are of my use and what the filter, blah blah blah. I give them the whole chad gadia, as we said in Pesach, and they said, okay, we'll give you a heter, reshut, and I have that at home. I have the reshut again. When kids know that it's something which is legitimate, then it becomes a tool. One of the chief soldiers or generals, not a soldier, against technology is in fact the Ger Rabbi. He's one of the, more than the others, alerted the world to the situation. He himself says, well, there are certain times where we have to have it for parnasa. So under those circumstances, with certain parameters, it's okay. Any child who is reasonably intelligent understands the difference between computer use for parnasa and between computer use for social media, for gaining information, for enjoying YouTube or anything else like that. They understand the difference. And as you don't personify the latter, then you're okay. Again, we have to be real. We're not going back to horse and buggy.
My point is leveraging the technology for good. Not forget parnasa, for good.
So let me answer that, and this might be
like, I think like Lubavitch, like that was like the big thing. Like let's leverage this thing and create this great website where we can carve people. Like that was one of the.
Let me ask you, how many simone kashrus are there for a behemoth? Two. There's a Tosfos that brings up my Yerushalmi, I think, that the chazer says ru'u, and it has split hooves, by the way, the swine. Ru'u, I have mafreses parsa, keshera ani. Right? It's not malagera, so we know the bottom line. The chazer is still chazer, but it tries to fool the world. So the computer use is disguised as adding cognitive perspective, broadening of horizons. I mean, those who have some mastery of the English language and come up with oodles and oodles of expressions to make it sound just peachy dandy. Here, there's another one, peachy dandy, right? But the emphasis is the chazer also shows the world. Ru'uk sherani, right? It's Chazal, but it's called the Chazar. It's called the Chazar, it's not Malagir. Technology is like that proverbial swine, right? At times we have to use it. Where would we get our footballs from if we didn't use swine, right? Okay, but Lamaisa, in terms of the analogy, it's a good analogy because although we do have to use it for certain things, such as yourself using it, and such as myself. I don't mean you, me too. Right? But if we understand that it's still a chazan, and it has all of the dangers and the threats that go along with that, then we're okay if we project that understanding to our children as well. Okay?
Maybe to reflect on some of the things that some of the parents are saying, and I was feeling myself actually in Klein here the last few weeks. We've been studying some of Hilchos Tznius, and in that it really comes up this question about like maybe children who grow up in a more exposed environment have better skills in handling them later when they go out into the world, because at some point we lose control of our children, whatever age that's going to be, and certain things we rather than learn it in a guided way than let them figure it out on their own.
So 2 answers. Number one, it's definitely a possibility. I had a television in the house when I was growing up, when I was a kid. Back in the day, how bad was it? Dick Van Dyke, those that speaks to them. It was not, so terrible. You had one also, right? It wasn't gefährlich. But I don't have it today. None of my kids have it today, because to some extent, I'm a little bit of a success story, as Mrs. Fisher is and other people in that genre who had some modicum of challenge growing up because of exposure, but survived it. In my class of 26 kids, 26 boys, who grew up with me in my class in Eitz Chaim, in Toronto, half of them ended up not being religious at all, not frum. Why? That's a whole, it's a can of worms. So one thing is, yes, it's possible for a kid to grow up and to be strengthened by that, but it's not necessarily going to end up that way. So the child is going to take the chance.
Yes.
Number
Be
two,
vaccinated.
what?
Be vaccinated. Taking the chance.
Number two, I'll share the famous story of, who was it? Rav Scheinberg. Rav Chaim Pinchas Scheinberg. The tzaddik with the 100 and whatever pairs of tzitzis. Rav Scheinberg said, Shamat Hashem Rav Scheinberg, Chacham Migdolei HaTorah. America, he went to live in Eretz Yisrael, lived most of his life in Yerushalayim, as Rosh Yeshiva, big yeshiva, the Torah. So he once shared that he's been living in America for all of these years already, in Eretz Yisrael all of these years, but when somehow, some way, he finds out that the Yankees, he was a New Yorker, that the Yankees won a baseball game, his heart skips a beat with joy.
את מכירה in the Yankees?
פחות או יותר. מכירה מכבי תל אביב.
אותו דבר. And we'll talk an Israeli story. That's also sort of Israeli. Rabbi Lapian Zatzal was the Mashgiach in Kfar Hasidim. He was in his late 80s when this story happened. The Bocher and the yeshiva came to me. He had a chasana in Bnei Brak and he wanted to go to the chasana. He wanted to do shus for the chasana. Now today, there's all sorts of ways of getting from A to B without necessarily going to it. It used to be called the Tachana Merkazit of Tel Aviv. I don't know if you remember Tachana Merkazit of Tel Aviv. To put it in a nice way, Makom Tinofet, right? In all respects. In those days, in order to get from Kfar Hasidim to Bnei Brak to Haifa, take the bus from Haifa to Tel Aviv, and take the Kaf 54 from Tachana Merkazit in Tel Aviv into Bnei Brak, right? But you had to spend a few minutes in Tachana Merkazit. So the mashgiach said, how are you going to go to Tachana Merkazit? So the bacher, the boy was about 21, 22 at the time, said, he says, I'm okay, I'm in Yiddish, it doesn't affect me. So he said, Bachurchik, I'm 88 years old. I'm blind in one eye. If I ever have to set foot on Tachana Merkazit in Tel Aviv, my heart beats and beats and beats and beats. So any exposure we have when we're kids lasts. It lasted for Rabbi Scheinberg, it lasted for Rabbi Lapian, it lasts for me, the exposure. I still remember Dick Van Dyke. Had that Dick Van Dyke been replaced by a Tosfos, I would have been a better person. I have no shiloh whatsoever. Did it really destroy me? No. But it didn't assist me. We don't want to assist our kids with things which don't really assist them, because they're not assisting them. They're hindrances to growth. When we recognize that these are hindrances, we have to look for the ways to get around it, not to disappoint our kids, not to allow them the feeling that we are disappointing them, that we are not providing for them, that we love them any less than other parents do. We can do that if we keep our minds on that objective of not letting our kids feel that they're being let down by what we provide. If only for the fact that we're providing them more and better things, then we don't have to worry about that, and we will have our own children with us. Yaser bidcha b'yanichecha v'yiten matanim l'nafshecha. Pasuk says, when Yaser means either making suffer a little bit, but it means also to teach, like Musar. Guide your son when he was a child, and he will give you menucha later in life.